All right, thank you all so much for being here today. We have our April webinar with Kara here, and we'll be talking about the pileated woodpecker. So without further ado, you can go ahead and get started, Kara.
Okay, great. Hi everybody. Thanks for being here. And thank you to the St. Paul Bird Alliance for inviting me to talk about pileated woodpeckers and our research project that we are doing at the Avian Ecology Lab, which is a part of the University of Minnesota. Um, it's a very it's interesting that today is the day that I'm giving this presentation because I just about half an hour ago got home from 4 days in of our first field week of the second season for this project. So I thought I was gonna get home a little bit earlier so I would have a chance to you know, get out of my field gear and stuff, but so it goes. But that's great because I can talk to you. I mean, like I have a very recent experience of being out in the field looking for these guys. Um, all right, so I like to keep it pretty casual with my presentations. So, definitely leave leave questions in the chat as you feel fit. And we'll have some time to talk about that later. And yeah, um, apologize if I am a little flustered. I'm feeling very tired from waking up very early and looking for pileated woodpecker nests all day and driving home 3 hours to get here to chat with you all. But very excited to be here. Okay, well, let's get into it. And if I can, there we go. Okay, so just I want to quickly orient everybody on our project and the background of this species and the goals of the project. So pileated woodpeckers are what we would call like a keystone species. And in Minnesota forests, they are a keystone species largely because of the cavities they create. So those cavities end up being used by a whole suite of other species. So we're talking like, wood ducks, species of conservation concern, even things like insects, bats. So several other species use these cavities. And as fellow birders, if you bird long enough, you will actually start to notice how many other species are tied to cavities made not only by pileated woodpeckers, but other woodpeckers like hairy woodpeckers and downy woodpeckers. So, but so specifically when we are talking about pileated woodpeckers, we're really talking about like a whole community that they create. So, for example, this is a study that was done in Canada, and it gives like a pretty nice picture of how many species use old pileated cavities. So you have everything from, there are mammals like pine martens and brown bats, all the way to other birds, bats, and even insects. So these are the species that really need cavities for their life cycle, but they can't excavate their own cavities. So they're relying on either cavities that are created by like natural decay or on woodpeckers like pileateds to create that habitat for them. So when a pileated excavates like one cavity, it's really creating like years of habitat for other species. So here are just a few examples of some species that rely on these cavities created by pileateds. So you have things like fishers and American kestrels and the cutest owl ever to be, the northern saw owl. So again, I just want to emphasize that when a pileated creates a cavity, it's not just a one-time use structure. It can end up supporting multiple species over time. And in some cases, the availability of those cavities can actually limit the population of some species. So despite how obviously important this is, we don't actually have a lot of information on pileated woodpecker ecology in Minnesota specifically. So the main goals of this project that we created at the Avian Ecology Lab is to understand how pileateds are using habitat across different forest management types, and then to use the information that we get from this study to guide forest management decisions that support cavity nesting wildlife like woodpeckers and all of those other creatures that I mentioned earlier that use those cavities. So a big piece of this project is actually finding nesting cavities and understanding how birds are using the landscape. So this is what I was out doing Monday through today, was searching for pileated woodpecker nesting cavities at our study sites. And this means a lot of hiking. There's still a lot of snow up north, so a lot of hiking in snow, and a lot of following woodpecker sign, chasing woodpeckers that are drumming, a kilometer away. A lot of staring at large trees and being very certain that you saw them maybe excavating in this area, but they were 200 meters away. And then when you get there, you're not quite sure. It's very humbling and very tiring. And very, very, very cool. And you spend a lot of time thinking about, if I was a pileated, where would I be making my nest? And, thinking that you've been in the right area for, days and days. And then when you finally do actually find their nesting cavity, it was 300-400 meters away and not at all where you thought it was going to be. It's a very, very cool field experience and truly one of the favorite field projects that I've worked on in my 10 years of doing avian ecology field work. So another activity for this is looking at what happens after those cavities are created. So this is our second year of this project. So last year we were out in these same study sites looking and finding pileated woodpecker nesting cavities. And we went back later and put cameras up on those cavities to document what other critters are actually coming in and using those. And then also doing things like measuring both the cavity and the tree itself and the surrounding forest characteristics to kind of see what specific habitat characteristics pileatids are honing in on, not only on their nesting tree, but also like the forest around it. So like I said, we went into the sites that we had found cavities in last year, and in the fall we put up trail cameras to see who's going in and out, and I'm just dying to go pull those SD cards and see who's coming in. And some of our field sites are actually in central Minnesota near Reamer, which I don't know if any of you know, but Reamer is actually the Bigfoot capital of Minnesota. So I'm especially excited to pull the SD cards on some of those cameras that are up there, because I have a feeling that we might be the first bird lab ever to capture Bigfoot on film. To be determined. We're not going to be pulling those until later this fall. Anyways, once we figure out who's actually using those cavities, and then we rule out Bigfoot or rule in, depends on where you are with that. This is where the next piece of the project comes in, and that's really taking everything that we have learned about pileatids in this study and turning that into management recommendations. So how do we actually maintain and promote those cavity resources across the landscape over time? So we want to develop these guidelines for maintaining cavity habitat over time. So looking at things like forest structure, harvest rotation, retention of large trees, things like that. So the goal is really how do we apply this? How do we manage our forests in the state in a way that keeps these systems functioning? So just some little details. I was talking about the study sites near Reamer Bigfoot Capital earlier, but this is kind of how we have set up this study. We selected sites that span different forest management intensities, so looking at higher, medium, and lower intensity management. And so then we can start to look at how pileated habitat use is different across that gradient. So I'm talking about like how often like logging or harvesting is happening within that area. So just a few details. We have kind of like our study sites are in two general regions in the state. So north central Minnesota, that's like around the Chippewa National Forest, which is where I was earlier this week and earlier this morning today. And then northeastern Minnesota, which is kind of near the Superior National Forest. And like I said, we have three study sites within those two different regions, and they are 8 by 8 kilometers. And for the low intensity ones, we're kind of looking at like how national forests are managed. So generally not cutting a lot of timber. And this is representing kind of like the best case scenario for old growth forests. And then medium intensity is kind of like how states typically manage their forest. So there's some cutting. And then the high intensity is like forests and areas that are like heavily harvested on like a short rotation. So often harvested big, maybe like clear cuts, for example. And these sites were selected, like I said earlier, so that we can start to look at how pileateds are, what their density is, how they are nesting, how their habitat use is different within those different kind of forest sites. And then this setup lets us start to ask questions like, how are pileateds, for example, avoiding heavily managed areas, or are they adapting in ways that we don't quite understand? Are they in heavily harvested forests? Are they just honing in on what few large trees are left? Just really interesting questions like that. So a big chunk of last field season and this coming one, well, I guess the one that we're in, is nest searching. So we're out from early April. We started on Monday through June, pretty much, 4 or 5 days a week. Last year, we found 4 nests in our northeast site, one in that high management, one in the medium, and then 2 in the low. And then in the central area, 3 in that medium management intensity, kind of our study sites, and then 2 in the low. And most of the nests that we found were in aspen, which probably won't surprise a lot of people who are familiar with pileated woodpeckers. But we did also find 2 that were in paper birch, which was interesting to us, at least at the bird lab. And one thing that we're starting to notice, even with this pretty small sample size, is that their nests aren't just restricted to like the best habitat. We're seeing them across those different management types, which raises some interesting questions. But they really are looking for like large, particularly aspen trees. And so these were 2 different nests that I found actually last year. The left one in an aspen, it had a really cute little fungus roof, and then the other one was a paper birch. So again, this is just very like preliminary results from the small sample size of nests that we had last year, but looking at the forest composition around the nests. So in this figure, each bar is one of our nest sites, so one of the nests that we found, and the colors represent the different tree species based on their kind of like relative abundance. So this is basically asking like what kinds of forests are pileateds choosing to nest in. And the first thing that stands out is how much variation there is, right? So the nest sites are not just in like a type of forest with like only one species. So like yeah, they're drawn to aspen clearly, but they're not nesting in just like pure aspen stands. Um, a lot of these are just like mixed hardwoods, and some have some pretty strong maple or birch component also. And like I said, this is just like the early stage of, just our first round of nests and analyzing, but it does look like they're using a pretty wide range of forest types. And another thing that's interesting is that looking between the regions, so the central sites seem to have a bit more of a hardwood mix, and then the northeastern have a lot stronger dominance of just like a few species and more conifer. We also are noticing that conifer in almost all of these has some component. And just anecdotally, we've all noticed that pileatids are hanging around like bodies of water a lot, whether that's a bog, a swamp, um, lots of like ponds or small lakes. Um, so just interestingly, it suggests that, at least at this preliminary stage, that they're not just tied to one specific forest type. They're looking for variation. Um, and it might be less about like the overall stand composition and more about just like having the right trees. So trees that are large enough with the right decay characteristics for nesting, but then also for finding their preferred food nearby. All right, so as I said earlier, that we put up trail cams at the cavities to document what other kind of critters come in, and use those cavities after the nest has gone through its fledging. And this video was actually taken when we were putting up cameras and measuring the cavities. So I'm gonna play it now. Maybe I'll play it a couple times because it goes pretty quick. And this is note, this is at half speed, but we have, if you look at the tree, we have a flying squirrel coming in. Where the camera is kind of like where the cavity was. So it's like coming in hot. That was pretty exciting. And then on the right, you can see when we did poke in one of our cameras to take a look, an eastern gray squirrel was using that cavity to spend its winter in. So just reinforcing how important these structures are just beyond the nesting season for only pileatids. Oh, there it goes again. All right. And then for each nesting cavity, we're collecting detailed measurements. So we're looking at the cavity dimensions, the tree species, the DBH, height, decay stage, crown class, and then characterizing the forest habitat around the nesting site. And this all feeds into understanding not just where pileatids are nesting, but like what features they're selecting in different management contexts. And another major component of this project is tagging adult birds to look at their home range and their habitat use. So far we have deployed 3 GPS tags. These tags can give us fine scale movement data that we are hoping to eventually link back to forest structure and management. The first bird that we caught was actually caught on St. Patrick's Day last year, so we named her Sally O'Malley. And on the right there is just like kind of like a little snapshot of the GPS data that we've collected so far. It's kind of interesting to start to see how she's moving through the Duluth landscape. We have also found that it is very hard to catch pileated woodpeckers. They are actually a very smart bird and don't like to come into nets. If anybody has any advice on how to misnet a pileated woodpecker, send me a note later, please. Thank you. Our second bird was caught at Hawk Ridge, and it was a hatchier female. We've had a lot of help from the Hawk Ridge folks for catching pileated woodpeckers. And again, just like a little snapshot of how this bird is using space within the Duluth area. And then again, the third GPS tag that we were able to put out was on another hatchier female that was caught at Hawk Ridge. And we have a current setup at Hawk Ridge, so we're throwing the kitchen sink at trying to catch these birds. We have decoys set up. We're using carcasses and suet to try to get them come in. It's definitely a learning process to figure out what's works best. We're refining the process as we go, but it is an unexpected challenge. So, moving forward with this project, one thing that we're really focusing on is tagging more birds. We have a lot more tags to put out if we're able to. Especially, we would love to get some tags out on some birds during the nesting season, without disturbing them at their nest. So I guess before the nesting season. The more individuals that we're able to tag, the better that we can understand how they're using space, especially in the broader landscape context and beyond the breeding season. So as we hopefully build that sample size across regions and different forest management types, we'll have a stronger position to link space use back to forest structure and management. And after this field season, we'll be moving into analysis of all of the data that we collect and pulling everything together to have a forest management recommendation, hopefully by the summer of 2027. All right, so I want to switch gears a little bit because this is where all of you come in. So a lot of us are birders, right? I am a birder myself. And we're all out there birding regularly already. I'm probably going to go out tomorrow night looking for some woodcock, and maybe try to get some ducks this weekend. But anyways, we're all out there, birding regularly, and we watch birds, we pay attention to their behaviors, and we're all noticing. We all notice when a bird is acting nesty, etc. And so we're calling for help from all amateur ornithologists or, professional ornithologists or just bird enthusiasts like yourself to help with the research effort by sharing the location of active woodpecker nests that you find during this breeding season with the Avian Ecology Lab. The more nests that we can find, the better that we can document and characterize breeding habitat, resource needs, and inform management options. So basically saving the world for woodpeckers, cavity nesters, and everything. Saving the world for saving the whole world. And okay, so talking a little bit about how to find and document a pileated woodpecker nest. Well, first I want to just talk a little bit about their breeding habitat and some tips for actually finding their nests. So pileateds really like aspen for nesting. They won't only nest in aspen, but they are really drawn to it for nesting. And big aspen in particular. So they need fairly large trees. We're talking generally at least 30 to 35 centimeters. That's the minimum in diameter. So tree size is really kind of the first thing to look for when you're scanning an area. And they also tend to use trees that are dead or in a state of decay. So still solid enough to hold a cavity, but not completely falling apart. The other thing to keep in mind is that they're often nesting in these mixed wood forests, like I mentioned earlier. So not just the pure aspen stands, they really like a variety of tree types where they decide to nest. So it doesn't have to be just like a just an aspen forest for pileated to choose to nest. And so there are kind of like two good windows in their breeding season for finding their nests. Um, First is the period where they are setting up their territories and excavating their nests, and this is what we are in right now. Yesterday, I found a nesting cavity, the first one of our whole group, which I am proud of. And the male was finishing up excavating, so he was still working on creating that cavity. Um, and so we're looking for things like male and female traveling together. They often call back and forth together. Signs of excavation, so big big chunks of fresh wood chips on the base of a tree. That's a good indication to look up. Um, Seeing a bird excavating, making their nest is obviously a good sign. And then if you're using your ears, listening for things like, hopefully this works, drumming. Is it gonna do it? Hold on. There we go. Play. There we go. Are you hearing it, Izzy? Yep. Thumbs up. All right. Okay. Not like I really need to play that one for most people. I mean, if you're out there, if you're birding, you probably know what a woodpecker drum is. But also they're calling. Uh, yeah, well, other bird. Right. That's a sign of territoriality. One thing that I have started to notice after, a full field season of nest searching is that the males will very often do a short one call like that, like ah, before they decide to go into their nesting cavity or to work on it. So that for me is like my go-to sign. If I hear a male just do one of that, I know that there's a great chance that he is going to his nesting tree. Um, and then also listening for sounds of excavating, listening if it's a quiet day where there's not a lot of wind, listening for that excavation, that like pecking in on the tree. I guess I could have just done it like that the first time. Okay. All right. Important. Um, Not every hole that we see in a tree is necessarily a nest. So pileateds are out there making two main types of holes. So they're in the nesting cavities, which are usually like these large, like really neat looking circular or kind of like oval teardrop shape and really deep. Um, that one on the left is actually the one that I found yesterday. But then there's also foraging holes. So these are more irregular. They're often kind of like rectangular, kind of hacked out. They might be lower towards the base of the tree, and so those are just foraging holes. So when they're looking for insects. So, but if you see something that is, often 8 to 13 meters up on the tree, and that's like nice, clean hole. That's more likely to be a nesting cavity than just a foraging hole. All right, so once you get a sense of kind of like what you're looking for, the next thing is like timing, right? So like I said, there was these two great windows um, for finding nests. So there's the earlier the excavating and the territory setup, and then the nestling stage, which starts usually in like mid-May to late June. And here we're looking for things like adults carrying food, obviously going in and out of a cavity, nestlings poking their little heads out. And then if anybody has ever found a woodpecker nest in the nestling stage, we know how incessant woodpecker nestling begging calls are. If anybody has ever been out and found a hairy or a downy woodpecker nest, they never stop. And pileateds are not very different. Here is this their sound. Okay, that's like a 1 minute clip, so I'm not going to put everybody through that. But that kind of incessant nestling begging, um, those are some good signs to look for finding nests. Um, and as I've said, adults going in and out feeding nestlings. One of my coworkers, Stephen Nelson, actually took this video of a nest that he found last year with a parent coming in. You can hear it. There we go. Yes, okay. The cutest thing ever. If anybody um, can think of a cuter nestling, I challenge you. Put it in the chat. Um, and this is a video that I took last year. I just, fate would have it, I happened to be there at the moment that this nest was fledging. So it's always nice to have at least one moment each field season that like reminds you of why you have, you know, spent the entire summer hiking and in remote areas being attacked by bugs and twisting your ankle and staring at holes in trees. But I just happened to get the 5 minutes when this nest was fledging. So hopefully it's loading very well. First flight. And one more video. You can hear the parents like encouraging them. All right, so what do you do if you find a pileated nest? Well, first you would do what any sane person would do. You celebrate um, quietly so as not to disturb the nesting family. But then you can contact us at the Avian Ecology Lab. I have a QR code here. Um, I've also sent out the like a um, MOU listserv if you're a part of the MOU, and I've posted on a couple of birding groups. But you can also send me an email, and I can send you a link to the document as well. Um, but good things to do. What we would like to know is like recording a location, obviously, so that if we decide to come back and do our habitat uh, assessment around the area, we can know how to find it. And also detailed notes on the location can be really helpful. Taking things like noting the species of the tree, what the tree looks like, taking photos of the tree, noting what direction the cavity is facing, and any other kind of like helpful notes, recording the date, um, and any other like things that you think would be useful, like what stage the nest is in when you found it, etc. If you were able to know what the fate of the nest is, um, definitely want to stress uh, that to observe at a respectful distance, right? No, nobody wants to disturb a bird while it's nesting. So you can get those locations from, standing at a respectful distance away and taking photos at a respectful distance, and just wanted to make it very clear that we're really only interested in like the tree characteristics and the forest characteristics around it. So we're not going to be going in and doing any of those habitat assessments until much after the bird has left the nest and the whole family. So yeah, um, if you are out this birding season and you happen to find a pileated woodpecker nest, we would love for you to contact us so that we can kind of add it to our database and get the more information that we can get, the better forest management recommendations that we can give. So, and yeah, with that, I just wanted to thanks everybody for letting me come and talk about this project that I have really loved developing and working on, and um, some of our partners, my friend Travis, who let me use a bunch of his wonderful pileated woodpecker photos. And yeah, with that, I guess I will take any questions, or if anybody just wants to chat about woodpeckers or field work, I would love that.
Thank you so much. The celebrate slide was my favorite.
Oh my gosh, I have used that. I have used that GIF in too many things now.
And the nestling noises are almost squirrel-like a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it was
really
so
neat.
interesting. Well, we already have lots of questions, but feel
Oh my
free
gosh.
to put some in the chat if you have any. And yeah, we'll take a few questions here. The first one is how large is large in reference to the size of the aspen you were talking about?
Yeah. So, the minimum uh, diameter, like DBH, is about 30 centimeters. So that's kind of like on the smaller end, and then anything up from there. However, anecdotally, we've noticed, and I was just actually chatting about this with some of my coworkers, that like the really monster aspen, which you don't really come across that much in casual birding, anyways, honestly, unfortunately, they don't seem to really go for those ones, but anything in that kind of like sweet spot of like 30 to like 50 or so centimeter diameter is what they're going for.
How many acres between each nesting pair are there? So what is kind of their preferred nesting range?
Oh, yeah. So, like, what is their kind of like territory size, I
Yeah.
guess? Yeah. Um, so I don't think an acre is too much, but I would say um, for the few nests that we have found and the territories that we found but never actually found their nests, we're talking like two to 2 to 3 kilometers between. Um, it would be really interesting to have a huge data set of pileated nests to see if that territory range is different in different forest types, right? Like that would, if we could do this study for 10 years and just keep getting more and more nesting documentation, that would be a really cool thing to figure out. But because I do imagine that it would be different depending on the more like the larger landscape context. But yeah.
Yeah. Why carcasses? I remember seeing this slide.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So, pileated woodpeckers will come to carcasses to feed on them. I don't know if anybody has ever been up to like the Saxon Bog for birding or like the visitor center. If you've ever seen that they have carcasses out, that's because in the wintertime, birds will come, um, like woodpeckers, chickadees will come and feed off of those. So that was something that we were using in the wintertime. Definitely the carcass bait situation we'll be putting that on the shelf once it gets warmer out. But yeah.
I totally forgot about that until you said that. There were tons. I was up there
Yeah.
in January. Yeah. Um, do cavities tend to have a specific directional orientation?
Um east-ish seems to be with the ones that we've found so far. Um the orientation, not all of them, but I think we had about a little bit more than half were facing in like the general east-ish area, but I don't know. Like I said, with our sample size, I can't be sure that that is a rule, but something that we've noticed.
Yeah. And I never thought about the fact that they have two different types of holes. They have the nesting hole and the
Yeah.
feeding. Yeah. Are you less excited when you see a feeding hole versus a nesting one, or not necessarily?
Yes. I mean, yeah, I mean, we spend so much time in these woods, and when you start to like get to notice their territories, like there's just foraging places everywhere. And one thing that we've noticed, because we take documentation of where we find foraging and then where we find the nest, is that the foraging um doesn't really seem to be super associated with where they're actually nesting cavity is.
This question, who will receive the recommendations? I don't remember what slide that was.
We work with like the DNR and for forestry serve with the Forest Service. You know, we make recommendations. Unfortunately, it doesn't always mean that um, it's always considered, but there are certain areas where, you know, forests need to be managed for wildlife, and especially if the wildlife are species of conservation concern, and a lot of cavity dwellers are, then then those management recommendations are more likely to be taken more seriously.
Does anybody predate on pileated woodpeckers?
Um, yes, so some hawks will especially predate on like fledglings after they've recently come out of the nest. I mean, lots of birds of prey will do that. Um, my coworker and I were just reading about red-shouldered hawks because we have a couple in one of our field sites, and we were like, oof, these guys moved in. I hope that doesn't, you know, scare them off. And they will sometimes take recently fledged birds, and then, um, but that's, you know, I think any predator that could get their paws on one would eat one, but there's not like a specific predator of pileates that I know of.
Do they only use a nest site once?
So typically they do. However, they will less frequently reuse a nest site. And what has been also documented is that sometimes a bird will take a couple of seasons and work on a nest cavity, maybe not nest there that year, but then come back. And we actually think that we're coming across that situation this year, um, with with a cavity that I had found last year that was never used, but a pair have been coming into it and starting to excavate it more this year. So it'll be really interesting to see if they reuse that. Typically, most of the time they'll make a new one every year, but it's not unheard of for them to reuse their nest or spend a couple seasons making a nest.
And if they don't use it, other critters will, right? Is that,
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so this person saw a pileated on a downed log near White Bear Lake at the end of May last year. Would that
Yeah.
mean that there was a nest in the area?
So, they will often forage on down logs. Um, so it's really not uncommon to see them foraging on a rotting log that might have carpenter ants or other grubs in it. Does that mean that there was a nest in the area? Well, I would say that if there was an adult bird during the breeding season in that area, that its nest was probably somewhere within their large territory, but they do forage on down logs.
And how many number of hatchlings are there per nest per hatch?
I don't know. Okay, I would say this is 3 to 5 is what.
Okay.
I don't know what the mathematical average is, but 3 to 5 is what we usually see.
That's actually more than I would think. They're big birds.
I know. Oh my gosh. When I saw that nest, Fledge 5 came out and it was
Yeah.
like a clown car, you know?
Hmm.
Like doo-doo-doo-doo. They just kept it coming. It was wild.
This is kind of related. What is the coolest thing you have seen while birding, just in general?
Oh my gosh. I mean, well, doing field work is so cool because you're outside so much. Last year I got to see a fisher moving its kits. So a fisher is like that, like a really large weasel that they have in northern Minnesota, and I got to watch it because they are cavity dwellers, and they actually have multiple cavities that they will move their young to over the period of their young being in the cavity. And I got to watch one moving its kits last year, and it was the coolest thing ever. So that was definitely up there. I've seen lots of bobcats and bears and um, I mean also honestly just watching the pileated woodpecker nest fledge last year like brought me to tears. It was one of them like just watching a bird take its first flight with its parents out there encouraging it to come and like you can tell that it's like reluctant and scared, but it's really beautiful. So yeah.
Yeah. And validating for your work,
Yeah,
something that you've
totally.
committed so much time to. Yeah.
Exactly.
What do adults feed their young?
Um, Lots of regurgitated grubs. Yep, lots of smushed up grubs and bugs and stuff that they have been foraging on and finding in the area. Good stuff. I've tried it. It's not for me.
I had a parrot nesting in a wood duck house years ago. Any idea how common this might be?
That's really cool. It usually goes the other way around.
Yeah.
So I mean, wood duck so much rely so much on pileated woodpecker nests. I would say that that is not common, but obviously if they were nesting there, it can happen. Birds will always surprise me. Um, so yeah, I mean honestly, it's usually the other way around, but that's really cool. I've put a wood duck house out and I have squirrels now. So that's a lot better.
The squirrels always show up.
It's actually pretty cute to watch them
Yeah.
take their little babies out.
Are there any other questions here? Feel free to throw them in the chat. Let's see. Oh, is there any particular bug items that they like or specific plants to plant to cultivate for them?
Their favorite food are carpenter ants. Um,
Oh, well, you don't want to
that's
put
yeah, you
those.
don't want those exactly. And they are pretty much just foraging on trees, like or like, dead or decaying trees. So, the best thing that you can do is if you have property or pieces of land that you can leave dead and dying trees so long as it's safe to do, like they're not going to fall on a house or something, to leave those up in the landscape. Like retaining snags is super important for not only woodpeckers, but all of those other animals that rely on cavities made one way or another by a woodpecker, whether that's a foraging cavity or a nesting. So that's something that you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you so much for being here. This was so interesting and really fun to see all the videos too. So, um,
Great. Well, thanks
thank you all
everybody.
so much. All right.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.